What's up everybody, D-Man back. Welcome to a brand new video, and today we're going to be doing another GXK news roundup. That's right, it is time to continue our chronological journey through the development and release of Godzilla Kong: The New Empire and the next MonsterVerse sequel, the next Godzilla Kong movie, by finally finishing off the events that happened in March of 2024. Let's jump into it. Starting out with some artwork, this is incredible. This comes to us from Rano, and this is the Battle at Hollow-Earth artwork. Oh my god, I love it. I think that I might like this artwork more than I like any of the visuals during the anti-gravity battle during Godzilla Kong: The New Empire. I think it's incredible. I love it. Please go show some support to the original artist down below. They're also shouting out where they got these models from, as there's a lot of incredible modelers at play here who made these things for them to work with, but I think it's incredible. Kong looks mean and fierce and awesome. Scar King looks sick as well, obviously replicating that moment in the movie, but I also really love that you can see both Kong and Scar King and Godzilla and Shimo fighting all in one shot. They've also included wonderful details like the pyramids touching each other in the background, and Godzilla and Shimo are looking straight out of the movie. Really great stuff. And they did not stop there. Rano released the alternate angle of this. You can see Kong and Scar King fighting way out there in the background. That's looking fantastic, but then you go way out and you can see Godzilla and Shimo taking each other on. This is so freaking cool, man. I love it. I love Godzilla all glowing, and Shimo obviously charging up her ice beam looks great, but that is so awesome. I love that they released the alternate angle of it as well. I think that this is truly incredible artwork, and so I wanted to show it off. I think it's fantastic. Finally, for the art, I really like this one. This is Munko's Evolved Godzilla redesign. I think this is a fantastic redesign for Godzilla for the next movie. I think it's great. One thing that I really love here is that it's like subject to change. They're taking suggestions from fans, so let me go through and give some. I would personally keep a more King of the Monsters styled foot. The 2014 foot being changed was done because of major backlash. The 2014 feet have never spoken Godzilla to me. Other than that, it's pretty freaking perfect. I love it, man. I love that they've transitioned this into a much more Godzilla 2014 style design. Obviously, they say they're leaning into the more bear aspects of Godzilla and taking some crocodile inspo. I freaking love the way they've done the spines with the multi-layer spine, the outer shell growing back, but the crystal top still peeking through. Very Showa. It is a fantastic way to re-achieve that multicolored spine. I think the face looks fantastic. I love this image of Godzilla in this fight pose. I think it looks incredible. I really love the extra bulk they've given Godzilla. I think it looks so awesome, and I love that they also show some of the ideas they had along the way, like these ones with the really large tail spines. I think those are very neat to see. Very crocodile, obviously, but I do have to say I'm very glad they didn't go with that. Personally, I know you guys all love the thagomizers, is that what they're called, at the tip of Godzilla's tail. They don't feel Godzilla to me at all, especially because he didn't use them in the movie, so they felt very ridiculous. This is a pretty cool way to do them. I like the way that they've been done here on this design. I'd personally make them even smaller because I don't think that they're very Godzilla to me, but this is a wonderful blend of Godzilla 2014 and Godzilla Evolved. I think it is just fantastic, and I would love to see something like this in the new movie, so I really wanted to spend some time with this. I think it's incredible. Now we got the playlist interviews. I'm going to try and dive through these quickly. There's so much juicy info here, so I'm going to try and go through these fast, but these are wonderful interviews. I highly recommend you go read them for yourself. These are like Toho Kingdom styled interviews. I really like it. We got a lot of info on the making of New Empire here. Starting out, Adam Wingard says when picking the IMAX sequences for this movie, most of the time the IMAX sequences were picked around creating the most immersion for the monster story and the world they inhabit. Sometimes the live action elements overlapped with that, such as the journey in the Hollow-Earth. Specifically, the actual voyage to Hollow-Earth using the heaves was designed in a way to give it an IMAX feel. Even the viewing screens of the physical heave props were designed to replicate that IMAX feel. One thing I find very interesting about Wingard's interviews is that he really doesn't focus on the scale of Godzilla and Kong, and that really wasn't one of the reasons he decided to do so many sequences in IMAX. He is instead focused on the world they inhabit and creating the biggest Hollow-Earth in the immersive world around Godzilla and Kong. I think it's a very interesting focal point that most directors don't have. We can actually see that as the playlist interviews continue here. Wingard says that the exciting part for him wasn't the monster fights, but instead designing the world around the monsters and the moments with the monsters between the fights, where they just get to exist as themselves. He's also echoed this with Godzilla vs. Kong interviews as well. He says because he's been working with Godzilla and Kong for 7 years, they wanted to really develop a monster movie like we haven't seen before, with an emphasis on an immersive feel, a world of monsters, and the monsters as the lead characters. Wingard says making this movie was like playing with toys in a slow motion sandbox, because it takes so long from the idea to the realization of that idea just simply due to the animation process. He says he tried to approach this as an animated film with hyper-realistic visuals. For Godzilla vs. Kong, he says it was kind of a sort of trial by fire, in that he got to learn what you can and can't ask for and what animators can and can't pull off. And it was only after learning all of these challenges that he felt like he really found his footing for another movie. This is something that I feel like has to be misspoken, but Adam Wingard claims one of the things he was most proud of was coming out of Godzilla vs. Kong without any reshoots. As we all know on this channel, Godzilla vs. Kong did have reshoots. They were just not like a designated massive reshoot period. It was that the movie basically had no script. From all reports, they essentially threw the script out when it came time to shoot, and they just kind of made things up on the fly, finding the story as they went. Major characters were cut from the film as they went through shooting. Jessica Henwick, that Hayworth assassin, Ren Serizawa's entire story arc was radically altered, making him an absolute side character that was worthless to be in the film in the first place. They also did things like shrinking Isa Gonzalez's story, getting rid of the Mothra twins. Literally, Mothra was supposed to be in the post-credits, and Dr. Chen and Dr. Ling were going to be major characters. Those were cut. Mark Russell's character was completely assassinated from King of the Monsters during the transition, as his screen time got cut as well. A lot of really turbulent transitions happened to create a movie which I still really like. But I guess, yeah, it's true. There was only one small reshoot period, which was standard for all movies during Godzilla vs. Kong. I cannot believe that's what he meant, though. I think he meant to say Godzilla X Kong, which I don't think had major reshoots. I think that went through a small reshoot period, like any movie, but mostly that was actually just second unit and plate shooting, getting environmental shots. About that, Wingard says it was important for him, because he says that if there are reshoots and massive pivots, the fully animated sequences can't make the transitions, so you have to think smarter than that, otherwise you'll run out of your budget. Another thing, it's been reported on Godzilla vs. Kong that lots of the fight sequences and major parts of the movie were radically altered, and so again, I just can't think that that's what they were originally talking about. In fact, based on the concept art for Godzilla vs. Kong, and who knows how far into the animation this got, there was no real original team up for the movie, as the concept art shows Kong destroying Mechagodzilla before the team up happens as he saves Godzilla from the laser beam. Thankfully, they made the change they did, because the final fight was way cooler than that. Wingard mentions how the budget for this movie was still a massive constraint on the film despite being so large, and how they were actually able to pull off nearly twice as many CGI moments with GXK as opposed to Godzilla vs. Kong, despite having basically the exact same resources. So they had to be way craftier when making this movie. This is something that I think you're either gonna love or hate, but while talking about toys and the toyetic nature of Godzilla Kong the New Empire, which in my opinion is the most toyetic Godzilla film ever made, and there's a lot of things that play into that we're about to talk about, Wingard claims that none of his ideas actually came from the desire to sell toys. He says that if nothing else, it's because he actually makes no money from the toys and the merchandise. For him, he says toys were on the mind for sure, but we're not driving the narrative. I feel like he kind of contradicts that in a second, but we'll go through it. He says that while working on the movie, he was trying to do things with the imagination of a child, and so he would picture the toys that could spin out of his ideas. He says when designing creatures and aspects of the movie, he would think about his childhood and 80s toy shelves, and he wanted to create things that would stand out on those shelves. He wanted Scar King to have a cherry red color, and Shimo to have the exact opposite of that, so that they would both pop on the imaginary toy shelf in his mind. He wanted Shimo to have this pearlescent quality, with a subtle iridescent sheen that would shift with different lightings because it would work so well as a figure. He also says this applied to things like the Beast Glove that Kong has, and that he could picture that on a shelf. As a side note, why did they not release a foam Beast Glove like Hulk Hand's version? That would be so fun. I don't know why they didn't do that, and they really should. Playmates, get on that. Give me a foam Beast Glove. As I've heard from inside reports, Playmates actually had a decent amount of influence over Godzilla vs. Kong. If nothing else than just on like the naming of certain monsters and maybe which monsters get prioritized in the final version over some of the other monsters that didn't make the cut. But Wingard specifically says Playmates was actually brought on early into development here because of their production on the Godzilla vs. Kong line, and he was really happy happy with that, so they worked with the GXK team to develop a lot of these ideas. He says he's really proud of the work Playmates is doing and that he actually had some design influence over their work, including the wonderful pink box art, which is one of my favorite aspects of those figures. He says Aliens was a huge inspiration for him, not because of the movie, but because of the toy line that spun out of that movie when he was a kid, and how awesome and captivating it was, and how the movie wound up living up to that toy line, and so he wanted to create the same thing here. An awesome toy line that the movie lives up to. He says this all started because when he made Godzilla vs. Kong, he did it without thinking about the toy aspect of the film. That was an afterthought that only came about once the movie was already done. But once he started to see the figures on shelves and them popping up in Walmarts, he realized the impact they had, and soon realized that this is a huge way to reach younger audiences and inspire and motivate kids. So this became a massive point of inspiration for him when making this new movie. He says that he is a nostalgic filmmaker and he wants to recapture the feelings of his childhood through his films, and I think he does a wonderful job at that. Godzilla Kong: The New Empire is absolutely what it was like to watch Godzilla films as a kid, but you get to watch it as an adult. It's very interesting in that regard. It truly is like one of the greatest kids adventure films ever made. Now we get into the big stuff. Wingard reflected on the connection between the eras of Godzilla and the eras of James Bond, and how they both kind of parallel each other in strange ways. He says it's interesting to see how the eras of Godzilla have these certain feels and how different they are from one another, and how the MonsterVerse has kind of taken a Showa route. On a side note, one of the reasons that the Godzilla franchise parallels the James Bond franchise so much is because early on they were highly inspired by Bond movies. A lot of the Showa films took big inspiration from Bond films. Wingard says that the MonsterVerse is on, and I'll quote, that Showa era trip now, but I'm sure these movies will eventually swing back around to being closer to what 2014 was like. It's going to depend on the filmmaker. Now I wonder if he returned, what the next movie would have looked like. Some later reports, as we'll talk about, indicate that maybe he had a bit more of a Heisei tone in mind, but I would argue that Godzilla 2014 had a Heisei tone. I don't think it totally was there, but I do think Godzilla 2014 was like this blend between the early 60s Godzilla films, maybe the mid 60s where Godzilla was transitioning to be a hero, and those Heisei movies. I think the same for Godzilla King of the Monsters, which I do think lays into the late 60s and the Heisei series and fuses them in a modern setting. So I'd be really curious to find out what the tone of Wingard's next film would be, but this quote kind of makes it sound like he was gonna still be on a similar path, just maybe dialing it back a bit. I'm very curious to see what Grant Sputero, I have no idea how to say his last name, I'm sorry, I'll learn over the next few years, I'll figure it out. I'm very curious to see what Grant Sputero does with the next Godzilla movie and what tone he leans into, but I'm really fingers crossed that we go Heisei series. I'm really hoping that this next Godzilla film is like the Godzilla 84 to this movie's Godzilla vs. Megalon, you know what I mean? Maybe not even 84, 84 might be too serious. I'm really hoping that the next Godzilla film is like the Godzilla vs. Biollante, or Godzilla vs. Destroyo, or Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, to the Godzilla vs. Megalon, Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster that was the New Empire. But Wingard does acknowledge that a tonal shift will probably happen, especially with the influence of things like Godzilla -1 and Monarch Legacy of Monsters, both playing into the early Showa series' very serious tone, and that's great. He also says if he returned, he would go in a different direction as well. He says that he doesn't just want to do the same thing forever, and he feels like the Showa vibe has been amped up as much as it could without going so crazy that it jumps the shark. I think many of us kind of feel that that is what happened. I feel that that is what happened. I do feel that we did make it to that point, and so I am happy to hear you can't go bigger than that. You can't go crazier than that. And I also like that he acknowledges that there are still plenty of amazing things to do with these characters and amazing things to come. But at the end of the day, it has to depend on the character, which is in this case the monsters involved, and what's best for their stories. He reassures us that there are many things left to develop and explore with these characters. I think it's interesting kind of picking your monsters and then saying what tone is going to spin out from those monsters. Like for instance, if we were to get a Space Godzilla in the next film, I would think that the tone would be very ridiculous. But if we were to get a Destroya in the next film, I could see it being incredibly serious. I think that's an interesting way to approach it, being like, what monsters are we going to use and how is that going to impact the tone? But what do you guys think about all this? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so comment below and let me know. As always, I want to give a huge thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. If you want to support the Patreon, you can use the link in the description below where you can get early access to content, access to the Discord community, and more. And if that's not your thing, please consider joining as a channel member. I really appreciate it. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you all next time for the next one. D-Man out.